And hopefully at that time as well, some reading on, after the pilots who have returned from the first wave at least, and perhaps from the second as well, some detail from them reporting on just what damage they were able to inflict and what the state of the Iraqi armament they think is now at. But there is certainly activity here through the night. It's a 24-hour watch on the ground here as well.
Speaking of the ground, no U.S. ground combat forces have been involved in the attack thus far, so far as is known. U.S. Army Apache helicopters, which have air-to-ground, helicopter-to-ground attack missiles, primarily designed to knock out tanks, are reported to have been involved in some strikes just across the border into Kuwait. They don't have much range, and therefore the Apache helicopters would be attacking with their Hellfire anti-tank missiles and their 30mm automatic cannon. The Iraqi tank concentrations dug in very deep with what Marine General Walter Brumer described to me a few days ago as what he said was a very effective Iraqi war engineering. Those Apache helicopters being attacked. The brunt of the attacks thus far by U.S. Air Force planes. If naval-based, carrier-based aircraft, Navy and Marine have been involved, we do not yet know that, although our military consultants tell us that probably some have been involved in the early going, with most of the others being held back for the second or even third wave and held in reserve. Also, part of the aerial bombardment, unmanned missiles of the Tomahawk cruise missiles. These are radar-avoiding missiles that have a range of 1,400 to 1,500 miles. Some of them were fired from ships such as the USS Wisconsin in the Persian Gulf. Others fired from other U.S. naval vessels in the Red Sea. That means the missiles traveled over Saudi Arabia. We don't know whether any of the Tomahawk missiles were fired from U.S. Navy ships in the Mediterranean. They could have been, although had they been fired, they would have had to go over Syrian territory. There's two schools of thought as to whether the U.S. ships in the Mediterranean actually have fired their Tomahawks over Syria into targets into Iraq. Perhaps we will find out about that as time goes along. Ed Bradley, here in our studios in New York, has been monitoring developments around the world. Ed?
Dan, we want to bring people up to date on what's being said around the world. In Japan, the Japanese Prime Minister Kaifu has said that Japan resolutely backs the U.S.-led multinational forces attack on the Iraqi military facilities. We've been in touch with our Moscow bureau, and as of this hour, there's been absolutely no reaction yet from the Kremlin. In Brussels, with the NATO and our allies there, they were briefed by the U.S. ambassador to NATO, and the allies reiterated, and I'm quoting, their solidarity and support for the enforcement of the United Nations Security Council resolution, so they have backed the attack. The U.S. ambassador to NATO, William Taft, told the 16-member alliance that the goal of the overnight air raids was not to occupy or dismember Iraq, but to liberate Kuwait. And he said that Iraq can still avoid further destruction by unconditional, immediate, and complete withdrawal from Kuwait. So the message that seems to be going out from all quarters as far as the United States is concerned is that these air raids will continue. They're going to come fast, they're going to come heavy, and they are going to be steady, and that Iraq can end them at any time by completing an unconditional, immediate, and complete withdrawal from Kuwait. We have had very little in the way of formal diplomatic reaction from around the world, basically because it's still night in much of the world, particularly in Europe. We did get some reaction from 3 ambassadors to the United Nations here in New York earlier tonight. One, the Kuwaiti ambassador, also the Israeli ambassador to the United Nations, and then the UN ambassador from Cuba.
I welcome the liberation of my country.
Has there been any Kuwaiti involvement in this initial first round of attacks?
Definitely, I mean, the Kuwaiti, they were at the forefront to liberate Kuwait. I repeat that we were engaged in the Kuwaiti, liberating Kuwaiti territory.
What sort of way, sir? Your Air Force?
Air Force. Until now, it's only Air Force.
Israel said that it will defend itself if it will be attacked by Iraq, and of course we have the right and the obligation to self-defense, but we will not take any preemptive strike.
We cannot be very optimistic at this moment because, as everybody knows, the Security Council has been manipulated by the U.S. since the beginning of the crisis and has been used as a tool for war. But I cannot be optimistic in terms of the accomplishment or the results. What I can assure you is that we will try everything to have the Council doing what the Council should and must do, which is to put an end to the war as soon as possible.
Dan, I think you'd agree that those were pretty fairly predictable responses that we heard from those three UN ambassadors. Over at the United Nations just a little while ago, the Security Council concluded a briefing by the UN ambassadors of the nations who have been involved in the air raids against Iraq. That would be the United States, Saudi Arabia, Great Britain, and Kuwait. Ambassador Thomas Pickering, picking up on the theme that was given to the members of the NATO alliance, said that the goal for the multinational force is the liberation of Kuwait and not the destruction of Iraq. And Dan, over at the United Nations, they've closed up shop for the night and gone home. You know, I would add that there's been a lot of optimism expressed because there's been so little reaction from the Iraqis, and there are people expressing the hope that I think we all have that this war is going to end in a very short period of time. If you talk to people who are knowledgeable in the military, certainly as General Chris just said a few minutes ago, there's no way, barring the miracle that Saddam Hussein throws up his hand and quits now, that this thing is going to end in a hurry. Ground troops are going to have to go in. Over in London, Barry Peterson, our correspondent there, talked with Paul Beaver, who is with the authoritative publication Jane's Defense Weekly, and he had a cautionary note along those lines.
We don't have any assessment released yet by the Pentagon as to exactly what sort of damage was inflicted. And of course, I don't think we should be jumping for joy and saying, oh, it's been one quick strike and the war is over. I think we need to just wait and see what the initial results are when they're released.
How many of these weapon systems, Paul, that we've seen in use in the last few hours have ever really been fired in anger?
Yeah, so this is from the military technology point of view and from those military analysts who follow the technology. This is, of course, going to be a very interesting conflict because so many of the weapon systems have never been used in anger, properly in anger, if you like, in a full-scale war by professional soldiers, sailors or airmen. Aircraft like the F-15, like the Tornado, aircraft such as AWACS, the Airborne Early Warning and Control System aircraft, which we presume must have been involved in directing these strikes. Nobody has actually seen these work before.
A cautionary note, Dan, is this war is, what, 9 hours old now?
It's about 9 hours.
Yeah, it's very early, and I think any optimism should be guarded.
And ours will be, emphasizing that always in the early stages, it's very difficult to find out what the truth of the situation is. Certainly in the early going, it looks from the American military standpoint, the Allied standpoint, very promising. That's about the best we can say. As our CBS News coverage of war in the Gulf continues, as the war enters roughly its 9th hour, the attacks are believed to have first started around 4:50 p.m. yesterday afternoon, U.S. East Coast time. More U.S. fighter jets are roaring into battle over Iraq, over Iraqi-occupied Kuwait. Iran voices, quote, deep regret over the war's outbreak. Iraq's Saddam Hussein remains defiant. From the sands of Saudi Arabia, still more F-15 fighter jets roaring into the sky, taking off as this one did, bound for the skies over Iraq. The BBC reports earlier fighter jet attacks. The first wave dropped an estimated 18,000 tons of explosives on or near Baghdad. The indication is that most of that was dropped not on civilian targets, but on military targets. Defense Secretary Cheney said the targets were located throughout Iraq and Kuwait and were primarily military. Early reports indicate that Iraq's military response has been virtually non-existent for whatever reason, and if you can believe the early reports, no reports of any Iraqi Scud missiles being fired. The Al-Hussein surface-to-surface mobile missile was one of the most dangerous weapons the Iraqis possessed, particularly as regards Israel. Early indications are that the Scud missile sites in Iraq received tremendous damage, especially those that were closest to Israel. Iran, which battled Iraq for 8 years, called the U.S. offensive, and I quote now, the Iranians, a blow to human life and resources of the region. Iran's President Rafsanjani said he was, quote, watching all movements carefully. Saddam Hussein on Baghdad radio declared, and I quote Saddam now, God is with us. And he said his nation would stand on strong and solid ground. Saddam Hussein also vowed to, quote, liberate Lebanon and the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights, repeating what he has threatened to do before. Joining us once again is our Middle East expert, Fuad Ajami, who's a professor at Johns Hopkins University. Fuad, as you watch the hours roll on, right, and the early, very optimistic reports, right now, I'm not sure I like this metaphor, but Mike Tyson, the heavyweight fighter, has a reputation of just coming off his stool, coming right out the first round, bam, it's all over. There's a lot of hope in this country that that's what's happening vis-a-vis the Iraqis as these hours roll by.
I agree with you, Dan. I like your metaphor. I think I'm very superstitious myself. Let's remember one thing right now. 7 years ago, a young man, a young boy in a Mercedes truck loaded with TNT took the lives of 241 servicemen in Beirut. So I don't think we've seen the end, and we've heard the end of the Iraqi response. Yes, it's very clear that the Iraqis lost the battle in the air. But I would think, and I'm not a military man, we have enough military expertise here, I would think that he always wrote off the Air Force, that we were going to hear from him through other more conventional means, that we would, and he always knew that we have to go after him in Kuwait on the ground. So I think I joined the cautionary note that yes, the early dispatches look good, but we have to wait and see exactly what the future holds out for us.
For the moment, Fuad, let us believe that Saddam loses the air war completely, totally, almost from the get-go. What could be next for him? What indeed is open for him?
Well, I think Saddam, you see, he believes in this phantom that he has created. He believes in the idea of Arab nationalism. He believes that he's really not engaged in a war between Iraq and the U.S., but really that this is an American Arab war, that he really is a representative of this large Arab nation. This is a phantom in some measure, but you know, there is some truth to it. So I think that the Arab allies we have on our side, what they must now be dreading is if we get into a long war in the Gulf, that what Saddam will do is he is going to appeal to the Arab sense of grievance. I like two words that you used before. I want to go back to them. The terrible efficiency of these weapons. As now the Iraqis and the other Arabs watch the terrible efficiency of these weapons, Saddam will be calling upon the Arabs to think of the sense of hurt and the sense of grievance. Remember one thing, Dan, since for 2 centuries now, if one can even go, if you really want to go this far back, for 2 centuries now, since the arrival of Bonaparte into Egypt in 1798, Muslim armies have been losing to Western armies, and they've been losing because they didn't really have the techniques and the weapons of the West. So I think as the Arabs watch the terrible efficiency of these weapons and see what has happened, this will be Saddam's hope. This is, in effect, that he would turn a military confrontation into a long, drawn-out political fight, and that he would make it virtually impossible or very difficult for our Arab allies to stay with us in this fight.
What are the repercussions in the Arab world of this? Let's, again, for the moment, accept the very positive and encouraging reports from a military standpoint. What are the repercussions this is going to echo down through the years?
Well, I think there is a view, I don't myself share it, there is a view that if we defeat Saddam so overwhelmingly, that we will embitter a whole generation of Arabs against America, that we will turn them against American power. Well, some Arabs, in effect, will identify themselves with this sentiment. They will feel the hurt and the defeat of Saddam. But let's not forget, it was only in August when Saddam broke the code of his own world and violated an Arab society and overran it without mercy. So I think there is a battle for the Arab soul. There is a battle for the Arab soul. There are those who actually think that the conquest of Kuwait is nothing really so terribly serious. And there are those who think, you know, in effect, that Saddam is a criminal and that Saddam is a menace to this large Arab world, and that you can't let him hijack the Arab world. You can't let him hijack the Arab future because he holds out nothing for this large world.
Well, Ajami, in my conversation with Saddam Hussein, he repeatedly came back, he warned, he said, listen, if you get into a war with Iraq, You're going to find explosions from below in Egypt, Algeria, Jordan, throughout the Middle East. Likely?
Well, I think we have tended to exaggerate this. This is what Saddam wants us to believe. This is what Saddam wants Mubarak to believe. Saddam, for example, looked at President Mubarak and said, look, you've joined the Americans against Arab nationalism. You betrayed the Nasserist legacy. He turned to the Syrians and said, you must join the believers and forget about this American-led coalition. So I think there is an American-Iraqi war, which is a military war, and then there is a battle, an ideological battle, between Saddam and his Arab rivals. And that's a battle we can't win for our Arab friends. They must win that ideological battle within the Arab world. They must win it on their own.
Fuad Ajami, our CBS News consultant in the Middle East, who will be adding perspective and context to our coverage as we go along. Reported from CBS News in London, Gorbachev may appear on Soviet television within a few minutes to talk about war in the Gulf. We'll be monitoring that situation for you as CBS News coverage of war in the Middle East continues. Dan Rather, CBS News, New York, with Connie Chung, Walter Cronkite, Charles Kuralt, Ed Bradley, in Saudi Arabia, Bob Simon, Scott Pelley, James Hattori, and in Baghdad, we've been getting our reports live and direct within the hour from Alan Pizzi. Pizzi reports that damage in downtown Baghdad on his first drive around it this morning. It seems to be little damage in the civilian center of Baghdad. Most of the damage, what there is, appears to be on the outskirts of Baghdad and primarily military targets. Unconfirmed report that there was at least one hit on the presidential palace along the Tigris River, but that is unconfirmed. Now, in these first hours of what's now called Operation Desert Storm, U.S. reaction to the strike against Iraq is taking shape. To sample public opinion, we've invited 3 residents of the Hartford, Connecticut area to discuss the situation with us. They are Tracy West, a United Methodist minister, Henry Brown Otter, a former Marine Staff Sergeant and Vietnam veteran, and Dan Lloyd, who is a philosophy professor at Trinity College. Thank you very much for joining us. We're still in the first hours of the war. The official reports are all positive, very encouraging about the possibility of a short war. Your thoughts and reaction, and as you talk to other people, what are they saying? First, Mr. West.
Dan, this is Reverend West speaking. I can hear you.
Forgive me, Reverend. In the live television, sometimes your anchorman gets confused, and I did now. I hope you'll forgive me.
That's just fine. That's just fine. I would say that I am deeply angered by the invasion, by the military action by the United States. I think that it's a moral obscenity that one drop of blood has been shed, and I include Iraqi blood as well as American blood. I feel that the leadership of Baker and the leadership of Bush has been at best incompetent, and more precisely bloodthirsty warmongering that has caused, tragically, the cost of human lives.
Henry, you're a commander of VFW Post, a Vietnam veteran. How are your men reacting to this war, and how do you react to what the minister just said?
Answer to question number 1, Mr. Rather, basic consensus at the VFW is we're very supportive of our government as well as our men and women. I depict another situation of Vietnam here with this woman by not being supportive. We have to support our troops while they're there and as well as when they come home, because war shatters. It shatters minds, it shatters hearts, and it shatters bodies. And support is the answer.
Pastor West, I do want to talk to Dan Lloyd in a moment, but what about it? Is it possible for you to be completely supportive of our military men and women in the theater and still use words such as warmongering and bloodthirsty as you just did?
I find I've been watching some of the coverage, and of course my access to some of the reactions of the military personnel have been through your coverage, and I find it really immoral, the kind of gloating over the efficiency of our technological ability to destroy lives. And I feel very strongly that the whole invasion is an example of our naked aggression. So I feel that I feel disgusted and angered by our behavior as a nation.
And you're taking into account, when you use the phrase naked aggression, that Saddam Hussein moved in, invaded, conquered, and then raped Kuwait.
Mr. Rather, if we are concerned about human rights and we're concerned about naked aggression, we need to use a consistent standard. We supported Saddam Hussein right up until a couple of days before he invaded. This administration consistently not only supported him, but helped to arm him when he was destroying his very own people with chemical weapons, the Kurds. If we're concerned about human rights abuses, we should look at El Salvador, a government that we are supporting militarily, and the kinds of abuses that are going on in that country.
Dan Lloyd, you're a philosophy professor. First of all, what have you been hearing from your students, and why did you change your mind? It's my understanding that you supported moving against Iraq until about mid-November, and then you swung the other way.
Well, first of all, my students have been surprisingly sensitive to the issues of this war. 2 nights ago, there was a vigil at Trinity College on the main quad. There are several hundred students there and faculty, and I've seen them at peace rallies around the Hartford area. They all seem to be well informed, and I think they have a great deal of empathy with the young people who are largely fighting this war. Regarding the second question, I think that my opinions changed in mid-November because our strategies seemed to change right about then. In the early stages of the crisis, the community of nations pulled together in an extraordinary and unprecedented way to bring force to bear, but non-violent force to bear on Saddam Hussein. And in November, I guess our memories are short, but in November, experts trooped into the Senate Foreign Relations Committee and spoke about how sanctions seemed to be working. Nonetheless, we started escalating and bringing more troops to bear, and our posture shifted from defense to offense. It was at that point that it looked like we were beginning the slide towards war that has brought us to this moment tonight.
Well, we have only a few seconds left. Henry Brown, I see you're wearing a Purple Heart on your cap there tonight, one that you earned in Vietnam. In the few seconds we have left, tell us what you're thinking at this moment.
I'm disturbed, but I'm not angry at the sense that I find it difficult understanding pacifists. It doesn't mean we have to be an aggressive force in this United States. But once again, I hate to be repetitious also.
Well, I'm sorry our time is up. I'm so sorry. I appreciate all of you being with us. Our CBS News coverage of the war in the Gulf continues.
You are watching CBS News' continuing coverage of Showdown in the Gulf. From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Dan Rather.
War in the Middle East now begins to consume one full day. Not yet that. We're now roughly 9 hours into the war, running up to a half a day of war, which has been concentrated with an air war with the targets inside Iraq and in Kuwait. We have only slivers of information. As the fog of this combat descends, it's very hard to make out just how great it is. It's clearly an air war on a very large scale. Ground combat, if there's been any, we're not aware of it. We are under censorship. We have mostly only official reports to go by so far, and the early official reports are very positive, very optimistic about the air wars conducted from the Allied side. Our coverage of the Persian Gulf War will be continuous on this CBS station. Here are the latest headlines. New air raids apparently are underway on Baghdad and elsewhere in Iraq and Kuwait. This would be a kind of second massive wave. U.S. and Allied pilots report next to no resistance so far. The U.S. urges Iraq to leave Kuwait now to avoid further damage and devastation. Saddam Hussein says on Baghdad radio the fighting has only just begun. U.S. F-15s and other warplanes appear to be taking off round the clock from bases in Saudi Arabia for raids on Iraq and inside Kuwait. The naval-based air power in terms of manned aircraft not yet brought to full bear. Not very much of it apparently has been used, although Tomahawk missiles have been fired from ships such as the USS Wisconsin and the USS Missouri. One American pilot from a previous strike says bombs and missiles, quote, lit up Baghdad like a Christmas tree, unquote. That pilot says his squadron fired all 24 of its missiles. The BBC says at least 18,000 tons of explosives may have fallen on and near the Iraqi capital in the first wave of air raids. During the evening, President Bush talked from the Oval Office of the White House about the attack he ordered.
Just 2 hours ago, Allied air forces began an attack on military targets in Iraq and Kuwait. These attacks continue as I speak. Ground forces are not engaged. This conflict started August 2nd when the dictator of Iraq invaded a small and helpless neighbor. Kuwait, a member of the Arab League and a member of the United Nations, was crushed. Its people brutalized. 5 months ago, Saddam Hussein started this cruel war against Kuwait. Tonight, the battle has been joined.
At the United Nations, U.S. Ambassador Pickering told the Security Council that Iraq should leave Kuwait immediately to avoid further attack and destruction. Outside the United Nations, there were some peace demonstrations, about 2,000 people estimated, and a bonfire that almost, but not quite, burned out of control here in New York. Protesters in Washington, D.C. Filled Lafayette Park across the street from the White House. Crowd estimate not given. We were told the maximum was perhaps 800 or 1,000 people there in Lafayette Square directly across from the White House. Connie Chung is with me here helping with our CBS News coverage, as is Walter Cronkite and Ed Bradley. Connie, you've been following Americans watching this unfolding drama in the Persian Gulf.
Dan, for one woman in Charleston, South Carolina, her emotions are deeply divided. She has a husband and a son in the Gulf. She supports them, but she does not support President Bush's war policy. As Erin Moriarty reports, she has become an outcast in her own hometown.
The military formation, it in fact will not key in on specific identifiable targets.
You're tough, remember? I am. You can make it through anything.
Like thousands of military wives throughout the country, Judy Davenport and her daughter are keeping a lonely vigil. Her son and husband are in the Navy.
My son is not over there. I spoke with him. He called today, but my husband is off the coast of Kuwait on a destroyer.
But Judy Davenport is not like most other military wives.
Peace! Now!
For the last 5 months, she has been protesting the government action that took her husband to the Gulf.
And I, like a mother lion, I guess, I'm going to do everything I can to protect him.
But here in Charleston, South Carolina, where the two largest employers happen to be the Navy and the Air Force, she is fighting the tide of local sentiment.
Well, she's a wimp. She's a crybaby. She's not supporting them at all. She's crying. They might get hurt.
That doesn't discourage Judy.
Everyone, I guess, doesn't have the courage to speak up when they see something wrong. But the love I have for that man and the love I have for this country will give me the courage to do anything.
As long as the battle in the Middle East continues, so will Judy's. But for now, the tissues pile up along with the hours as she waits for some word. Erin Moriarty, CBS News, Charleston, South Carolina.
A lot of tears tonight from many relatives who have their loved ones in the Persian Gulf. I think there are many students out demonstrating tonight, and one of them was at the University of Texas in Austin, Dan, and she said, I don't think this is going to do much good tonight, but she hopes so. She prays that it will, and I'm sure that many of these people feel that it's necessary to say something, to speak out. But for everyone that does, there are probably just as many at home supporting the effort.
We've tried to make the point through the evening and early morning, Connie, that however one feels about the policy, about the start of war, as an American, one can feel solidarity with the families and with the young men and women who are in harm's way in the Persian Gulf. The course of the war, thank you, Connie, the course of the war, for the moment, and for the foreseeable hours ahead seems to depend on the success or failure of air power, primarily American air power. British, Saudi, Kuwaiti pilots are also involved in the early going, but overwhelmingly this is an American air armada, American manufactured planes. There are some British Tornadoes involved, but the course of the war depends now on how the air war goes, and here's why. Because the strategy is the use of overwhelming air power and complete air superiority, if it can be established, and the early indications are that perhaps it can be, that will reduce the amount of ground combat that will be necessary to get the Iraqis out of Kuwait. Now, Bob Schieffer has been following the early stages of the war, and he joins us now with some, Bob, do I understand, Iraqi details on how the war is going.
Dan, I thought you would be interested in this. We've talked about the reports coming out of the Pentagon tonight, our sources in Israel, our sources in Great Britain. We've had those reports. I thought you might be interested in knowing that Iraq has issued its first official military statement. This would be Iraq's equivalent statement to the briefing given by Defense Secretary Dick Cheney tonight. It is officially named Military Communique Number 1. And here is what it says. It says Iraq was attacked by America's cruel aggressors. Warplanes flew from 6 different directions. The Iraqi air defense confronted them with the brave Iraqis. The air raids managed to achieve little of their aims. The raids were aimed at heavily populated areas, at civilian areas. This, of course, is clearly just propaganda, but I thought we put this into the mix as kind of an illustration of the kind of information that the Iraqis are getting about this. This statement came at about the time that a second wave of attacks were being launched by U.S. planes during the daylight hours. At this point, we're simply waiting for reports on what those planes accomplished. Dan.
Thanks, Bob. Dateline Moscow. All forces in the south of the Soviet Union have been put in a state of what's called high military alert because of the Persian Gulf War. This word comes from the chief of the Soviet Army General Staff. The chief of the Soviet Army General Staff said, told the TASS news agency, and I quote, "We are watching closely the development of the situation in the Middle East," unquote. TASS said that President Mikhail Gorbachev is due to make a televised statement to the Soviet people on the fighting very shortly. We passed that along a few minutes ago. We do expect Gorbachev to speak to the Soviet people within this hour, and we will be bringing details of that to you as soon as they are available to us. Now, we have emphasized, as President Bush did in his address, that no ground combat, at least not yet. That is not to say that there will not be ground combat eventually. It depends on the success or failure of the air war. In Saudi Arabia, as skies began clearing after some rain, bad weather was expected in the area over the weekend. Could have been one of the reasons that President Bush decided to attack when he did. With bad weather closing in for the weekend, his options were beginning to get narrowed down some. Another possible factor was the reports during the day that Saddam Hussein was moving some of his chemical warfare materiel closer to American forces in Saudi Arabia. But the scene in the northwestern section of Saudi Arabia, where U.S. ground forces are concentrated this morning, mile-long convoys are rumbling north past abandoned automobiles on the side of the road. The twin-rotor Chinook helicopters, so familiar for those who saw combat in Indochina, were swooping low. When you talk about the possibility of ground combat, so far it's been the air war. The possibility of ground combat, to give you a frame around which to think about the possibility of ground combat, more than 1 million soldiers are ready for battle around the Persian Gulf. Almost 700,000 in the U.S.-led Allied coalition. The French have forces there, the British have forces there, the Egyptians and the Syrians, as well as the Saudis. But overwhelmingly, these are U.S. forces, total of about 700,000. Well over 400,000 are Americans. And then more than 500,000 Iraqi troops in southern Iraq and Kuwait. Of course, there are other Iraqi ground forces inside Iraq itself. Should a major land war develop, it would be by far the largest land war since the Vietnam conflict. There would be those who would argue that it has the potential to become much larger as a ground war. But right now, the concentration on air attack. Walter Cronkite, we've been emphasizing as we go along here that in the early stages, it's awfully easy to get sucked in by official reports. One of the things we've talked about, no casualties reported on the Allied side at all. there must be large numbers of casualties in Iraq and Kuwait, given the number of air sorties and missile firings that have taken place.
The tonnage that was dropped, 18,000 tons they're talking about. I remember in World War II, the first 1,000-ton raid on Berlin, with the pictures coming back of a city in flames. It was a nighttime RAF raid. Dresden was destroyed with far fewer tonnage than this. 18,000 tons is an awful lot of explosive to be laid on not a particularly big area, a lot of area that is pretty much desert itself. It sounds like a tremendous effort. There must have been casualties, as you say, on the ground. I'm wondering why, Dan, we're so long delayed in getting even an interim communique from our own war room at the Pentagon. It would seem to me that the American people are owed some kind of an early report. We've had nothing but unofficial reports so far. There are all those people, all of those dependents of the soldiers, airmen out there in the desert who are begging for any word, official word. Why haven't we had it yet? It's been quite a long time now. There wouldn't be any harm in giving us some information at this point. One of the things that we can be pretty sure of is that the enemy, since these attacks have been on the enemy territory, know what has happened. If we lost some airplanes, they know we've lost airplanes. It can't be a military secret at this point.
Well, but it has been the pattern with both the invasion of Grenada, what was called the rescue attempt at Grenada, the operation in Panama, overwhelming with commanding force, very little information given in the early stages. Now, the only official briefing we had was immediately after President Bush's address. That was at 9:30 Eastern Time, was the one and only Defense Department briefing.
And that was scarcely a briefing on what has really happened. We didn't get any real detail from that.
There will be those, and not all of them in the military, who will argue that in the early stages it's difficult, even for the military, to pull together all of the reports and to get a clear picture of what's going on.
I kind of doubt that today. I mean, surely, detailed picture of damage, particular damage pictures have to be assessed, and they're rather hard to assess, as we know. But the general overall report of how our squadrons fared, the losses, for instance, were they light? Were they actually none? We know that. I mean, the only possibility is that we might have some aircraft that pilots have bailed out of, and we're trying to protect some pilots that were on the ground, and therefore we don't want to announce that we've lost aircraft that the Iraqis might not know about. I can understand that as a military possibility, but I should think we could get some kind of an indication from the Pentagon by this time. I just hope that the American people are not being ignored as they were in the case of the Grenada invasion as a matter of policy.
Walter Cronkite, among the important developments as of this hour as our coverage of war in the Persian Gulf continues are these. It's daytime now in Iraq, a second major wave of U.S.-led bombing raids underway. Whether they include missile attacks as did the first wave, the Tomahawk missiles, we simply don't know. No official word on any U.S. casualties so far. Things, according to the official military picture painted, seem to have gone very well for the U.S. early strikes in the early hours. Soviet military forces now on alert in the southern part of the Soviet Union. Mikhail Gorbachev expected to address his nation at any moment now. By all available reports, we don't have many, but all that are available, the conflict over the skies of Iraq and Kuwait has been entirely one-sided. Air forces led by the United States, but also including Great Britain, Saudi Arabia, and Kuwaiti piloted aircraft, apparently met little resistance in their first massive attacks. Why there was so little resistance is not yet clear. In London, it's reported that 18,000 tons of bombs were dropped in and around Baghdad alone in the first wave of air assaults. No sourcing of that estimate. CBS News correspondent Alan Pizzi in Baghdad says there has not been much damage that he could see in civilian concentrated areas in and around downtown Baghdad. So far, the Iraqis have been unable to make good on their threat to strike back at Israel. In fact, there are no reports of any substantial Iraqi resistance at all thus far. Again, underscoring it's unknown what the reason for that is. A lot of speculation, but very little facts. Here at home, the peace movement seems to be picking up at least some speed, even as the war is just beginning. Thousands of persons demonstrated across the nation in demonstrations which were described both small and large, the largest being perhaps here in New York, where an estimated 2,000 people demonstrated tonight, and also in the San Francisco area, where a demonstration of what was described several thousand took place. Let's check in now again with Bob Simon in Saudi Arabia on what has been described as an overall and in general second wave of air attacks. Bob?
Dan, I think it must be pointed out here that the news is so overwhelmingly victorious at this point that it's entirely possible that it's all true, but I think we must add a few cautionary notes. The flow of information is so tightly controlled. Our access to what is going on is so tightly controlled. Journalists are so tightly put into Pentagon-formed pools, and their access to information and to the sites of what is going on is so limited. I think it is worth noting that the only report we have had so far of any damage to any American or Saudi installation, cameraman David Green's reports of Iraqi artillery hitting a Saudi oil installation, is from the one journalist who was not organized into a pool. David Green just happened to be up near the border in Khafji and witnessed that himself and reported to CBS News about that. A few other cautionary notes. It was always assumed by everyone here, by the command, that the Air Force was ready to go. That's another reason why they went so quickly. It was the weather. It perhaps also included these reports of gas being loaded. But the Air Force was ready. There was never any doubt about that. The most doubts have been expressed about the Army. The Army has not been put into play yet. Let us hope that the air war will be sufficiently successful that the Army will never have to be put into play. But this is where the real test will come. The Americans have wanted to test their gadgets here. The Hellfire missiles, the Apache helicopters, the M1A1 tanks, all these war machines that have never been tested in battle before. Even if they're successful, and the preliminary reports right now seem to be that at least the air gadgets are very successful, the Iraqi test is something entirely different. The Iraqi test is one of endurance. If they can endure these punches, if they can endure, and if Saddam can wait it out, can just stay there for the foreseeable future, we can win a war and yet not win the battle. Dan?
Bob, you spoke earlier of David Green, our combat cameraman who's covered so much war, and who, so far as we can make out, is the American journalist who is farthest up, closest to the Kuwaiti border. David Green now reports in Khafji, Saudi Arabia. That's where the Iraqis with artillery from inside Kuwait had hit the Saudi Arabian small oil refinery. David Green reports the shelling stopped there about 45 minutes ago. He could see the flames from that small Saudi Arabian refinery. All is quiet in Khafji now. You can see on the map. Now, to orient you, the Persian Gulf is off to the right. The major American forces are down south of this Khafji. This is very close to the Kuwaiti border, with the Marines on either side of the roadway close to the Persian Gulf. U.S. Army troops mostly off to the left of Khafji, and well below that, David Green reported that Saudi Arabian forces that had been around Khafji, as soon as the shelling started, said David Green, the Saudis saddled up and left. He knows not where they went. He raised the possibility that perhaps they were, quote, redeploying. We simply don't know. He also reported that there were a few scattered American military people north of where he was and west of that, which is practically on the Kuwaiti border, but David Green said he thought that they were communications forward observers. Now, Tehran radio in Iran reports that, and I'm quoting now, Iran will not open its airspace to any of the parties of the conflict. That conceivably could be bad news for the Iraqis. Hard to make it out, as it sometimes is, as to what the Iranians' intent is in this particular situation. The Iranians quote Saddam's radio speech as saying that the Iraqis, quote, will strike at the infidel and their allies. The confrontation has started with Bush, the devil. This is the Iranians quoting Saddam Hussein's speech, and that the Iraqis will win over the invaders. Quoting Saddam Hussein still more, the thrones of the traitors will collapse and the will of the White House will be defeated, unquote Saddam Hussein. The Iranians also report that the Palestine Liberation Organization is appealing to the Arab, Islamic, and all nations of the world to bear their responsibilities to, quote, confront the aggression of the Arab nation. You say, well, they ask Arabs and Islamic nations, keeping in mind that while the overwhelming majority of Arabs are of the Islamic religion, that many others, the Iranians, for example, are not Arab, but they are Islamic, and Islam spreads on as far to the east as Indonesia, and many people of the Islamic religion in the Orient, so that would explain why the PLO is calling on the Islamic nations everywhere to be part of this. Barry Peterson is in our London listening post. Barry, we have only about 35 seconds, but what are you hearing there?
Well, we're getting some of the first blush reaction on the economic front, Dan. The dollar is dropping, gold prices dropping. In essence, traders reacting to this upheaval in the world, not reacting very favorably to the American currency, although they do say that perhaps if the war turns out to be a successful American victory, the dollar might rally. But as I say, the first blush reaction on the currency markets, not a good one.
And we've had earlier reports in Tokyo of considerable stock activity. Our CBS News economic experts say it may be a while before we see the full shakeout. Much depends on how long the war lasts, of course. CBS News coverage of war in the Gulf continues. Last report from downtown Baghdad, additional Iraqi anti-aircraft fire is said to have started up after it was silent for a while. Apparently the second wave of what is designed to be unrelenting air assault on Iraq and on Iraqi forces in Kuwait is underway. Joining us now is Doug Weed, former Special Assistant for Public Liaison at the White House. Doug, thank you for being with us. You've been involved in the development of public opinion strategy for the White House during the invasion of Panama. How will the White House maintain and solicit support for what President Bush now calls Desert Storm?
The White House strategy will be very simple. It will be endlessly complex to implement, but the strategy first will be get the President's message out. If we're going to take criticism, if we're going to take hits, let's take the hits and criticism for what the President does and what he says, and not for some distorted version of that. So there will be a great effort to get the President's message out. And secondly, quite simply, identify all the players, all the institutions, all the individuals that have sprung up like grass after a volcano with their various interests. Find those who support the President and lend the credibility of the White House and the credibility of the President to them. Now, beyond that, I might add, beyond any communications or liaison strategy in the White House, the President, as you know, is a man who's very inclusive by nature, and he has said he will not let this be another Vietnam, and I'm sure that applies domestically as well as militarily in the field. He'll make every effort to reach out to everybody, even to critics, and do everything he can to hold this country together. His ego's in check, and he can listen to people with a different opinion, even when his own mind is resolved. He'll reach out to everybody.
You know the President very well. You helped write his 1988 autobiography. Were you surprised at what he did today and how he did it?
I was not surprised. I'll put it to you this way. The President constantly surprises people, so I was not surprised to be surprised. One would think the likely thing would be for him to delay a few more days, to let a few senators, a few politicians here in the country take the lead, to get out front, to say, quit pussyfooting around, let's go, so that the President is back in the pack a little bit further. He did achieve, I believe, surprise against the Iraqis for that very reason. I don't think it was expected in spite of everything that he said.
I'm a little reluctant to use this because of the source, but Adolf Hitler was one of the originators of the theory that, as Hitler once put it, those who control the images control the race. That's a direct quote. And ever since that time, political leaders, national leaders have been trying some version of that. Is that what, frankly, is unfolding tonight in the early stages of this war?
No, I think a president would be irresponsible if he didn't communicate to his people and communicate his version of events to his people. He has to do that. I mean, this is not propaganda. The president, when he spoke tonight, the themes that he enunciated, there was a moral underpinning. The president's talking points, if you will, which you'll be hearing a lot in the next few weeks, few months, have a moral thread woven throughout them. it'd be irresponsible for him not to mention them. He spoke of 5 things that I saw in the speech tonight that I believe you're going to see repeated continually.
And what were those things?
One, peace that we did try, that Saddam Hussein knew about the 15th. He knew about the 15th. We did go to Geneva. We were trying peace. 2, we aren't the only country in the world who came to this conclusion, that this was necessary, that this was the morally responsible thing to do. Indeed, they all came to this conclusion, virtually, and that's the United Nations resolution, which he emphasized. And the third thing, don't think for a minute that this is political. That's the message behind calling attention in his speech to the bipartisan, or to the consent of the Congress, which involved Democrats as well as Republicans.
Mr. Weed, excuse me for just one moment for interrupting. We have fresh Pentagon pool pictures, Saudi Arabia, 35th Tactical Wing, United States Air Force, returning from strikes inside Iraq and or Kuwait. These pool pictures just made available as part of the U.S. military. These pictures have been subjected to censorship. But these are aircraft arriving back in Saudi Arabia after strikes deep into Iraqi territory. Mr. Weed, we don't have long left here for this segment as we watch these pictures of American airborne warriors returning from their early strikes. But what about conservatives? Much of the criticism about President Bush going to war, or threatening to go to war, has come from the conservative wing of the Republican Party. Have you been surprised by that?
I haven't been surprised because we're not fighting atheistic communism. So that's a spin that is likely to happen. This is a little more complex, a little bit different. Everyone compares it to Vietnam. It's not the same thing. But I think you will find, and the polls will show, that within this week, the conservatives in this country are going to unite behind the president. The moral appeal, motivation to the president, or rationalization to take him to war, was what happened in Kuwait. The president is moved by personal experience more than he is by casualty reports. He was in Panama, and when the rape of Kuwait, the atrocities, when that intelligence came to the president, I think that was the trigger more than anything else. People say, how can he go to war? I think he went to sleep at night saying, how can we do nothing? In a post-communist world, there's not the threat of nuclear war from this. How can the United States sit back and let this happen? We have no excuse this time. I think that was the motivator. I think that will rally the conservatives at this time.
Thank you, Mr. Weed. I think you'll agree as we go along that we're still in the early stages of the war. Difficult to tell what the ramifications will be. No one kids himself. The ramifications will be far-reaching for the presidency of George Bush, for the future of the United States in its world leadership role, for our own economy and for the world economy. We'll be trying to address all of those subjects as our continuing coverage of the war in the Middle East goes on this CBS station. We'll continue our coverage in just a moment of war in the Middle East.
Watching CBS News continuing coverage of Showdown in the Gulf. From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Dan Rather.
The United States and its allies have gone to war against Iraq. They have, in effect, a siege of Iraq and the Iraqi forces in Kuwait underway. The first edge of the wedge of the siege, a tremendous air attack. Here are the latest headlines in our continuous CBS News coverage. A second wave of air raids on Baghdad is now confirmed. The Soviet military, southern part of the Soviet Union, gone on the alert. A divided Congress unites behind the president. Congressmen and senators now saying the time for debate is not now. The time now is to give support to the U.S. military operation. The latest daytime raids followed the first wave of nighttime raids launched last evening under cover of darkness. It was the new moon has not yet appeared over the Persian Gulf area, and the fact that it was the last of the dark nights for a while, one of the factors, no doubt, inducing President Bush to go ahead and make the strike he had planned. Another was bad weather was forming for possibly over the weekend. Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev is expected to address his country on the conflict in the Persian Gulf shortly. We're monitoring Soviet television and radio. We'll bring you details as soon as they're available. Meantime, military installations in the southern part of the Soviet Union have been put on military alert. A reminder that at the height of the Cold War, even a few short years ago, the whole context of war in the Persian Gulf would have been different. The threat of war in the Persian Gulf would have been different, with the Soviet military a threat to intervene on the side of its allies, the Iraqis, but those days long gone. Just a reminder of how far we have come, how many developments have tumbled one behind the other in the few short years going into the 1990s, and that we are in the first major crisis of the post-Cold War era. President Bush told the nation and the world that all precautions would be taken to hit only military targets. But Iraqi radio, monitored on the island of Cyprus in the Mediterranean, Iraqi radio says that residential areas of Baghdad have been hit. Our correspondent in Baghdad, Alan Pizzi, said in a short drive around the center of Baghdad he saw no civilian targets hit, but he emphasized he hadn't been able to get out very much. According to U.S. military officials, official reports, Iraqi resistance to the onslaught has been, quote, insignificant. In this country, a Congress that was so divided and debated so much over whether to go to war in the Gulf, whether to give President Bush the resolution he wanted, it finally did so. The Congress is now united behind the president and the decision to attack.
I think all of us are deeply concerned that this war now be as short as possible, that, as the president indicated, it be with the minimum loss of life and is decisive in its result.
Well, this is obviously a very fateful decision that President Bush has taken, and it's one which I believe could end for years, maybe for generations, the brutalization of some by others simply because they have more power.
While Congress falls in behind the president and his policy, there is still much dissent among the American people. How much is difficult to judge, but there have been significant demonstrations at the United Nations headquarters in New York. At least a couple of thousand people turned out. There have been demonstrations across the street from the White House in Lafayette Park and in San Francisco, as well as in some other U.S. cities. We've been saying along the night that if we're going to err, we want to err on the side of caution. We're trying very hard to be a dependable, reliable source of information for you. We said that many hours ago that there had been unconfirmed reports that Saddam Hussein's presidential palace along the Tigris River in downtown Baghdad possibly had been hit. More reports come in indicating that at least part of the presidential palace may very well have been hit. We now feel fairly confident in saying that the international airport at Baghdad, as one might expect, was one of the early targets. Also hit in the early going oil refineries inside Iraq. So far as we've been able to determine, we have one eyewitness report. CBS News cameraman David Green says the Iraqis, with their artillery from inside Kuwait, hit at least one Saudi Arabian oil refinery near Khafji. That's just a few miles inside Saudi Arabia, across the border from Kuwait, near the Persian Gulf. Now, Radio Cairo's stringer Jeff Phillips has told CBS News that a military spokesman in Egypt had the following to say, and I quote, "Reports reaching Egypt suggest that the backbone of the Iraqi Air Force and anti-aircraft missile systems, the backbone has been broken." This is according to the Egyptians. The Egyptian spokesman described the military situation, quote, as very positive, unquote. "We hope," he said, "that the effect of the air attacks would have a sufficiently demoralizing effect upon Iraqi land forces as to reduce significantly their operating capacity." Now, this dovetails with information from other sources that the course of the war depends on how successful the early air attacks can be. Those air attacks, unrelenting, are designed to reduce as much as possible the necessity of ground combat. Now, the Egyptian spokesman, as passed along to us by our stringer on scene, Jeff Phillips, is said to have estimated that a land attack against Iraqi troops inside Kuwait would certainly be necessary, that was his phrase, but that such a land attack may not be launched for at least another week. Now, that's the view of an Egyptian military spokesman. As I read that, I was recalling a day not too long ago at the ancient Egyptian city of Alexandria on the Mediterranean, interviewing Egyptian President Mubarak, and when the on-camera interview was over, President Mubarak, who believes he knows the Iraqi military capacity quite well, said to me, he said, "You know, you Americans may be surprised how quickly you can get in there and get out." Now, we are a far cry from having done that, but that direct quote from President Mubarak is rolling around in my head and ringing my ears tonight. Mubarak and the Egyptians had helped Saddam Hussein and the Iraqis in the critical stage of their war with Iran. Mostly Egyptian artillery and artillerymen helped repel the Iranians from the key area of Basra. Connie Chung, along with Ed Bradley, Walter Cronkite, and others, has been here at our CBS News headquarters helping as the evening goes along. Connie, your special area of responsibility is to look what's happening north, south, east, and west with the American public.
Domestically, Dan, we've been talking to relatives who are waiting, hoping that their military personnel, their relatives, are safe in the Gulf. Oceanside, California is home for thousands of relatives of Marines, and their husbands train at the nearby Camp Pendleton. Our David Dow is there. He's been there with them this evening as they endure this difficult evening. David, tell me, how have they been reacting to reports of the military success?
Well, Connie, the air attacks against Iraq launched a new countdown in this community, which is, as you noted, is the home of some 30,000 Camp Pendleton Marines deployed in the Persian Gulf area. Now, most are ground forces, and for them, the question is how many more days before the air attacks give way to a ground invasion that might well involve Camp Pendleton Marines for yet one more time. When President Bush addressed the nation via television shortly after the air attacks began, you could hear a pin drop in a crowded local restaurant where the television was on. The television was on, too, in hundreds of homes of Pendleton Marines. This woman, the fiancée of a Marine in Saudi Arabia, expressed the hope of most that the conflict would be successful and quick.
I pray for them. I pray for President Bush and hope that God will give him the wisdom that he needs to do it, and God bless him for being able to make the decisions, because I know there's a lot of other people that wouldn't be able to. And I hope they come home quickly, get the job done. I hope that they're safe.
What are your thoughts for your fiancé right now?
To do his job to the best of his ability. He is heart and soul Marine Corps, and he wouldn't be anywhere else. And just if he can do what he's trained to do, then he'll be okay.
The attack on Iraq prompted special editions of one local newspaper. Another will send newsboys into the streets of Oceanside in a few hours to scream the headlines. In the local business district, reaction to the attack has been largely one of support mixed with concern.
It seems that they are sad. A lot of them, it appears, have relatives over and they're fighting the war, and they don't know exactly what to expect. So you see a lot of people with jitteries.
I was kind of anxious for the guys over there, you know. I know some people over there, and kind of worried about them.
My own opinion is I think it's about time the United States starts sticking up for themselves, because I know I was in Vietnam, and it was really a political war over there. And like I said, I agree with them going in the way they did now and getting it over and done with instead of dragging it out.
One big source of relief here that so far there have been no reports of counterattacks involving chemical weapons among the wives and others who wait for servicemen in the Persian Gulf. That has been among the very deepest concerns. Connie?
David, when was the last time these relatives heard from their loved ones?
Well, in some cases, as recently as yesterday via telephone. Many, I talked to one tonight, who hadn't heard from her loved one, in this case a fiancé, for 10 days, not since he left Camp Pendleton for the Persian Gulf for a conflict that he thought was inevitable.
And no doubt they won't be able to have any telephone contact for some time.
At the moment, it's all in the realm of uncertainty. They hope that sometime in the coming hours to hear from their men and women over there, but given the circumstances right now, that's all sort of on the back burner.
All right. Thank you, David Dow in Oceanside, California. Then there's an incredible sturdiness about these people. They keep a stiff upper lip, these relatives. We've seen a lot of tears tonight, certainly, but I'm amazed each time we see yet another interview with a relative of someone who is in the Gulf, who seems to just hold up under the pressure.
And again, emphasizing how important it is for all of us to express solidarity with them, however one may feel about the political decision. Solidarity with the troops in the field is in the American tradition. Thanks, Connie. Quote from an Iraqi spokesman in Dhahran, quote, "Our planes went in, the bombs went down. There's been no reaction from the Iraqi side." We're going to go now to CBS News correspondent Bob Schieffer, who is with David Aaron, who is the former National Security Council staffer. Bob?
David Aaron was in the White House when Jimmy Carter was president. Mr. Aaron, we have not heard very much about any kind of an Iraqi reaction to all of this that has happened. In fact, the only thing we really know about is this artillery shelling of an oil processing plant or refinery or whatever it was. What do you make of that?
Well, I think it's important to be cautious till we get the bomb damage assessments, but it is possible that we really flattened them. I don't think we can exclude the fact that we not only destroyed a lot of forces, their communications, but also totally disorganized their ability to respond. On the other hand, they also may have just be hunkering down. It's possible they're not good at fighting at night with their aircraft, that they kept them inside their concrete bunkers, and that they will then come out and try some kind of an attack which will make a political point. And my judgment is that if they try to do that, the likely targets will be either the oil fields that run down here along the Persian Gulf or out in the Gulf, or, and I think this would be a prime target, one of the aircraft carriers that we have in the Gulf itself, either the Midway or the Roosevelt.
So in other words, while they would recognize that they could not defeat this enormous force that has been arrayed against them, they might do what people would call a publicity stunt of some sort.
That's right. I mean, you have to remember the Tet Offensive in Vietnam, for example, was an enormous military defeat for the Viet Cong, but it made the political point that they could inflict very heavy damage on the United States and on the South Vietnamese forces. I think similarly, I would imagine that Saddam Hussein is trying to husband whatever force he can to try to carry the fight to us in some dramatic political way. That may be one reason why the Naval Air Force, the airplanes on our carriers, have held back. They may, a lot of them, the F-18s, for example, are air defense as well as attack aircraft, and they may be held back to make sure that the Iraqi Air Force is, in fact, as beaten as it appears.
Now, you have been on the inside as number 2 to Zbigniew Brzezinski when he was a national security advisor to the president. You worked on the National Security Council in the White House. If you were there now, and with what information that we have, if you had that information, what would you be reporting to the president? How would you tell him that things seem to be going at this point?
I'd probably be tuned into CBS. It's remarkable how the news that comes into the Situation Room is really dominated by the kind of public news that we have here. They will be getting a report probably from the General Schwarzkopf, and they will have satellite photographs that are probably beginning to flow in because it's daylight. And so there will be some new reports to give to the president. But it's remarkable how detached you really feel in the Situation Room, how far away these events seem, and how little sense of control that you have over them from the very top of the U.S. government.
From what you know now, if you were advising the president, what would you be able to tell him about how the war is going?
I think that I would be able to tell the president that the United States has achieved 2 very important political objectives with this military assault. The first one is that it appears that we're now going to be able to make sure that Israel stays out of the war. The missile batteries seem to have been, the Iraqi missile batteries seem to have been destroyed, which was the greatest threat of drawing Israel into the war. And by keeping Israel out, that's a major objective we've achieved. The second is that we've had no major disasters. And we've never started a war without a major disaster, whether it be the Second World War or the Korean War. We've always had some really enormously difficult problem. That hasn't happened here. We're off to a very good start. That will help hold the coalition together, and of course it will give a lot of boost to the morale of the troops that are fighting out there.
David Aaron. Dan?
Bob, Dateline Nicosia, Cyprus, where part of our CBS News worldwide coverage, we're monitoring events. Iraq now says that Allied planes attacked, quote, residential areas in Baghdad, as well as a number of air bases, and that the bombing runs are continuing. And while we have David Aaron, who's filtered through a lot of reports in his time, What are we to make of this report? Clearly, the Iraqis will engage in propaganda, as we will, as we can, but what are we to make of this likelihood? The Iraqis say flatly that residential areas in Baghdad have been hit.
Well, my guess is that there are military installations around Baghdad, and the city flows out into those regions. And my guess would be if there's any truth to these stories at all, they would be that in addition to the military targets that were hit there was some collateral damage in the residential areas around the air bases.
Thank you, David Aaron. Our coverage of the Persian Gulf War continues. These are among the headlines of the hour. U.S. military officials say that the air war against Iraq could last for 3 or 4 weeks before ground forces swing into action, although President Bush may order brief pauses in the bombing to give Saddam an opportunity to sue for peace. Second wave of air raids on Baghdad underway. The daylight wave, the night wave was earlier. 150 Saudi jets are said to have been involved. These are mostly United States manufactured jets. Saddam Hussein reportedly has been spotted at a Baghdad television center. That report is unconfirmed, but he's believed to have been spotted there. The Soviet military on alert in the southern part of the Soviet Union. Gorbachev preparing a television address to the Soviet people. So far, the U.S.-led forces have met little resistance. Iraq has apparently not fired a single one of its Scud missiles. Let us revise that to say that if they fired any of the Scud missiles, it has not been confirmed. There were earlier reports originating with the BBC that some Scud missiles actually had been fired. There was another report out of Bahrain, quoting an unidentified Bahrainian government sources saying that some Scud missiles had been fired, but that they had not come anywhere near their targets. The threat to attack Israel has not been fulfilled. These Pentagon pool photographs just in show F-4, so-called wild weasels, from the 35th Tactical Fighter Wing, reportedly the first jets to go in after Iraqi surface-to-air missiles had been suppressed. Now, these F-4s, we've talked a lot about F-15s, which are the primary fighter bomber involved, but these F-4s are designed particularly, among other things, to help knock out missile sites. These are military-censored photographs. The F-4G Wild Weasel is an especially sophisticated electronic warfare fighter. It can, among other things, jam enemy radar. It has air-to-surface infrared and guided missiles, the so-called smart bombs, that have apparently been key in suppressing the Scud missile sites, particularly those that were closest to Israel and that had been believed proposed the greatest threat to Israel. There are a growing number of reports indicating that Iraq's Air Force and anti-aircraft missile systems have been, at the very minimum, heavily damaged, possibly even destroyed. Again, a cautionary note. While the optimistic and positive reports coming out thus far need to be noted and reported, that they do come primarily from U.S. and allied sources. Not surprisingly, the price of crude oil is rising rapidly on world markets. Yet, however, in Tokyo, the stock average closed up nearly 5% in Thursday trading. I want to note that the price of crude oil, which bounced up above $40 and closed behind those scores with cash. Now, this is a tactical wing fighter talking about his experiences.
All 12 of mine came back, and to my knowledge, everybody got back.
Yeah, when did you actually come back?
I'm sorry?
How long ago did you come back? He's got a head in.
This is pool coverage, military censored material. He's from Saudi Arabia. The pilot's just back, and the essence of what that pilot was saying, let's see if we can pick a little more of it now. The essence of what he was saying was we went in and we did what we were supposed to do. We hit our targets and we got back. We were saying a moment ago, as we look at these new Pentagon pool pictures, these come in and we feed them to you raw as we get them, that the price of crude oil shot up in closed-door cash trading in the early stages of the war to above $40, but the last report was down somewhat below $35 a barrel. That situation may bounce back and forth depending on how long the war lasts and how it proceeds. Now, we mentioned earlier that unidentified U.S. government spokesmen in Washington are saying that the air war could, mark that word, continue for a week or more before there's any ground combat. these same spokesmen raised the possibility that President Bush might want to pause as time went along to give Saddam Hussein a chance to respond positively in some diplomatic way. But Washington is filled with all kinds of reports that underscore one point. Now that President Bush has gone to war, he is determined to make it unrelenting until the Iraqis get out of Kuwait. Mark Phillips is at the Pentagon, where analysts are going over pictures to see just how much damage has been done so far. Mark?
Well, Dan, we do seem to be in something of an official information hiatus here, at least for the period through the night here, although, of course, as you've been saying and as we've been hearing, it's daytime and the battle apparently is continuing in the Gulf. The Pentagon has announced here that they don't anticipate any kind of major announcement until about 7 or so o'clock in the morning, our time, when we expect to hear again from Secretary Cheney and perhaps Colin Powell, the Joint Chiefs Chairman as well. In the meantime, though, we seem to be in, even though the attack apparently is continuing, into something of an intelligence collating period here, where, as you mentioned a moment ago, satellite photographs of the area will be closely examined. The plane cameras, many of these attack aircraft carry photographic equipment on board, which films during the course of these bombing runs, and they'll be able to see from those pictures, which they're presumably examining now, just how effective at least that first wave was. Dan?
Mark Phillips at the Pentagon. The first phase of the air war targets included Iraqi air defenses, command and control centers, and the Iraqi Scud missile sites. It is unclear just how much damage has been inflicted on those Scud missile sites. The early indication is the damage has been plenty. CBS News coverage of war in the Middle East continues. As the second general large wave of the Air Armada strikes Iraqi forces inside Iraq and Kuwait, all across America tonight, in towns and cities, large and small, it's a time for waiting, time for worrying. In towns like Norfolk, Virginia, military towns, things are particularly difficult and tense. CBS News correspondent Richard Schlesinger visited Norfolk just hours after the war broke out.
Hi, Daddy. Just tell him that I love him and I missed him, and Teresa and I are waiting home for him.
Please be safe, and I'm proud of all of you out there.
Hey, and I love you, and keep your chin up.
And we're praying for him.
Norfolk, Virginia, home of the Navy's Atlantic Fleet.
I love you. Be very, very careful, and I can't wait for you to come home real soon.
Since Desert Shield began, more than 31,000 military men and women have shipped out of here.
You scared?
Yes. I'm very scared. I pray for peace.
It's a radio request line.
Be careful, and we're all praying for you. That's all.
All right, thanks a lot. Thank you. You take care now. Bye-bye.
Disc jockey Eric Stevens will send this tape to the Gunston Hall, a Norfolk-based ship on duty in the Gulf.
Hi, Daddy. Happy Valentine's Day. I'm writing you a letter. I love you and miss you. Come home soon.
Mel, did we get any mail from Dad?
Yeah, I got your letters.
Oh, good.
Cindy Ady's husband, Gene, is on the battleship Wisconsin. She hasn't spoken to him since Thanksgiving.
He said the first time I called, Mel was at homecoming. The second time I called, Jamie was at a basketball game. And the third time, you were getting the car fixed. And now the fourth time, nobody was home.
What do you think? How do you think he is?
I know he doesn't want to be there, and I know he's scared. And I'm afraid he's scared that we're not doing okay.
Is today, do you feel different today than you have leading up to today?
Yes. You know, I can't relax, I can't sleep. It's just, it bothers me.
Today in the Gulf, Cindy Ady's husband, Gene, practices for war. While she worries about war at home, reading his letters.
Sometimes things get a little scary, things that you hear and stuff. I guess that is why I stay on the ship as much as I do. Hopefully this will be over soon. Love, Gene.
Did the possibility of war ever enter your mind?
No. No. Isn't that terrible to be that naive?
The entire 80 family is learning about war. For 12-year-old Jamie, the battleground was at school.
He just started joking around, so I just hit him.
What was he joking about?
He was saying our dad's gonna die, so I just punched him.
He said your dad's gonna die?
Mm-hmm. I just punched him.
When Jamie's father heard about the fight, he wrote back.
And he told him, I want you to go on top of my bureau and get my gold initial ring. And whenever you get sad or you get scared or you're worried about me, to just wear the ring and I'll be with you at all times.
Lord, give me all wings of your peace.
Cindy 80 has come to a special vigil.
I don't want to be alone because I'm scared. There'll be unity there. I'll be with my children. I'll be with my friends.
The service is for members of this congregation who are part of Desert Shield.
Stanley Crawford, Jim Dennis.
Each one,
Barbara
including
Parker.
Jean 80, is remembered by name.
William Henderson, Jean Eady, Jeffrey Bush.
Boy, you go to church and you sit there and it's quiet and you think and think. And then I start crying. Church is the one time that we're always together. So it's hard for me to go to church to begin with because the minute you sit there and you look down the bench, hey, somebody's missing.
Dave, I love you. I want you to come home soon. Happy anniversary.
Just on that, I baked him another batch of cookies, and they should be on their way soon.
The kids are growing. Kelly's walking. She has 3 teeth.
Hi, Daddy. I love you. I miss you.
The Difficult Hours, as seen and heard in Norfolk, Virginia, with CBS News correspondent Richard Schlesinger. Here at CBS News headquarters in New York is our live, continuous coverage of war in the Persian Gulf goes on. Joining me now, the stars, major anchors of CBS This Morning, Paula Zahn and Harry Smith. Good to have you, and in a few moments I'll be handing off to you. As you've watched and listened to these incredible events, the early hours of a new war, what stands out in your mind the most, Paula?
I guess what strikes me is the amount of surprise there seemed to have been in Iraq that these strikes came as frequently as they did and as hard as they did. And I guess what we'll be exploring all morning long is how it is that we either overestimated or underestimated the strength of their Army and Air Force.
Harry?
The other thing that I'm struck by, Dan, is as I was home last night watching the evening news, I think that we have some late-breaking word from London right now. Let's break away and check in with Tom. Go ahead. This is
the new British Prime Minister is making a statement. Let's see if we can pick it up.
We don't have the audio on that, Dan. We'll try and get back to that in a second. The only point that I was trying to make, as I was at home watching the evening news, watching you last night with millions of other people, and through the evening, as we had guests in our home, there's a sort of a real sense of disbelief that all of this was happening for a lot of people. As much as there was an incredible preamble for months and months and months and talk of war and rumors of war, and we watched the buildup as it actually unfolded, I think for a lot of folks, there was a real sense of being stunned and almost a sense of disbelief that it actually had transpired.
After 5.5 months of waiting, the thunder in the sky began. CBS News coverage of war in the Gulf continues.
Watching CBS News continuing coverage of Showdown in the Gulf. From CBS News headquarters in New York, here is Dan Rather.
And at our CBS News war coverage headquarters in New York, it's my role now to hand off for the coverage over the next several hours to those who will be at the center of it, Paula Zahn and Harry Smith. Paula and Harry, as we start this hour, the war has been underway for roughly about 10 hours, confined primarily to the air war, no ground combat reported yet. I'll see you as we go along.
All right, Dan, we'll see you back here in a couple of hours. We want to first take care of some of the headlines that, let's go back to London right now and hear the British Prime Minister.
The possibility of us needing to use force at the end of the deadline
over a considerable period of time. The final decision that we would use force if Iraq did not remove themselves from Kuwait was taken very shortly after the conclusion of the House of Commons debate on Tuesday.
Prime Minister, do you honestly believe that you've used force as a last resort and that there was no other way of getting Saddam Hussein out?
Yes, that has been our position for a long time. Of course, the United Nations resolution was set some time ago with a particular deadline so that there was no doubt that in international law there was a proper authority to use force after the expiry of the deadline on the 15th. I don't think Saddam Hussein could have been in any doubt at all from what has been said over recent weeks that at the expiry of that there was authority to use force and that we would find it necessary to do so to expel him from Kuwait. I am myself satisfied that that was necessary, and I hope this will be a speedy and successful operation.
Prime Minister, is there any assessment at this stage of how long military action might have to continue?
No, there can be no assessment of that at this stage. We have some preliminary assessments of the damage that has been done, but we will need a considerable degree of extra information before we can be precisely clear about that. Thus far, the assessments are that a considerable amount of damage has been done, but they are very preliminary assessments, and we will have a good deal more information later.
When did you first hear about the attack, John?
I, of course, have known about the timing of the attack, as I said a few moments ago, from the consultations I had with President Bush at the conclusion of the House of Commons debate on Tuesday. I therefore was aware of the time the attack would take place.
How have you spent the night, and what are your feelings now that war has started?
No one wanted this conflict. No one can be pleased about the fact that this conflict has been necessary, and I regret that as much as anyone. I have been up throughout the night. We have had an open line to the White House, and there has been very considerable consultation throughout the night. I hope now that it is clear to Iraq that the scale of the Allied operation is such that they cannot win. I hope that Saddam Hussein will now make a very swift decision that he must do what he has been invited to do by the world community for a long time, that he should get out of Kuwait and enable this matter to end swiftly and decisively. I hope that he will do that.
Prime Minister, could the war be over in a matter of days?
No, I can't forecast that. We will prosecute this war until it comes to a successful conclusion. There is no doubt at all what the world community wants. It wants Saddam Hussein to leave Kuwait and Kuwait to return to its rightful government. When that matter is concluded, the war will end. But there should be no doubt about our determination to prosecute it to that end. International will is very strong. International law is quite clear, and it has been made absolutely clear by the Allies over recent weeks that that is our determination and our intention. It remains so. I will now leave you, if I may, but I will report to the House of Commons this afternoon. Thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
It's the British Prime Minister, John Major, and that's coming to you live from Great Britain this morning from number 10 Downing Street. Here are the top headlines in our continuous coverage. The air war against Iraq is said to be going well. Iraqi air resistance may have been broken, its missile batteries knocked out. There are still no casualty reports from U.S. officials. The Soviet military is on high alert in the southern Soviet Union. A source in Egypt says this morning that the first 2 waves of air attacks on Baghdad and other targets has broken the back of Iraqi air resistance. But, he said, a ground attack on Kuwait will be necessary, but won't come for at least a week. The first American planes to strike Iraq were F-4 Wild Weasels, which targeted surface-to-air missile sites. They followed an early strike by American Tomahawk cruise missiles. President Bush told the nation shortly after the attack began at 7 Eastern Time that things were going well.
The 28 countries with forces in the Gulf area have exhausted all reasonable efforts to reach a peaceful resolution, have no choice but to drive Saddam from Kuwait by force. We will not fail. As I report to you, air attacks are underway against military targets in Iraq. We are determined to knock out Saddam Hussein's nuclear bomb potential. We will also destroy his chemical weapons facilities. Much of Saddam's artillery and tanks will be destroyed. Our operations are designed to best protect the lives of all the coalition forces by targeting Saddam's vast military arsenal.
The president also said care was being taken to avoid civilian targets, but Iraqi radio reports monitored in Cyprus say residential areas have been hit in Baghdad. They give no details as to casualties, and American officials are saying nothing about any casualties among U.S. personnel. The British say all of their planes returned safely after the first raid on Iraq, a raid that they say saw 18,000 tons of explosives fall on Iraq and other military targets. In this country, the voices of dissent continue to be heard. Just across the street from the White House in Lafayette Park, about 1,000 demonstrators called for peace. That's the latest news for right now. Paul?
And we just heard moments ago from the new Prime Minister of Great Britain. We're going to go back to London right now, where Barry Peterson is standing by with more. Good morning, Barry.
Good morning, Paula. Well, there were a couple of things the Prime Minister said. One of them, I think, of quite importance. He said he was asked a question, would he consider a pause in this attack, and he said no. It's an ongoing operation. He says if Saddam Hussein wants to withdraw, that's a separate matter. But, said the British Prime Minister, he's not willing to risk the lives of British soldiers by pausing to allow Saddam Hussein to regroup. So it calls into question the whole theory that some people have promoted, that perhaps the idea here is to punch Saddam Hussein and then back away and give him a chance to sue for peace or whatever. What Major is saying is no, the punches will keep coming. He also gave us some insight into how the attack went. He wouldn't be specific, but he said it inflicted what he called a considerable amount of damage. And he stressed that the Americans and that the British are in close cooperation, an open line, he said, between the White House and Great Britain. Now, as you can see behind me, it's really just morning in Great Britain. People are really just waking up at this point, having breakfast, turning on the TV, and discovering that this country, just like the United States, is now at war in the Persian Gulf. Paula?
Barry, do we have any better sense right now at this time of the morning just how many British aircraft were involved?
It's unclear at this point, but the aircraft involved, the British Tornado, is a lead advanced strike aircraft. And the reason is because it carries a very particular kind of bomb, a bomb that can destroy runways. The bomb was frankly invented to be used in Eastern Europe. The idea was to destroy runways that would have been used by the Soviets. What it does is it targets the area, it blows craters into it, it also implants mines so that if you go back to try to repair the runway, there are more explosions. So the British experts that we talked to tonight think that their Tornado bombers were probably among some of the very first lead airplanes to get in, get to those Iraqi airfields, and inflict a lot of damage, therefore keeping the Iraqi airplanes from getting up into the air.
All right, thank you, Barry. We'll be checking in with you throughout the morning.
We want to go back to the White House right now and check in with Linda Tyra. Linda, what's the latest in Washington?
Good morning, Harry. Here at the White House, it is amazingly quiet after what had been the most extraordinary day so far of the Bush presidency. The president returned to the private quarters of the White House around 9:30 last night after delivering that speech from the Oval Office. There at the family quarters, he joined an old family friend and a house guest for the evening, the Reverend Billy Graham. For tomorrow, officially, the president has a very light schedule, but we know unofficially that in the background he will be having a lot of briefings, including an intelligence briefing around 8 o'clock in the morning. He will also be meeting with his national security staff and his top advisors, including Secretary of State James Baker. We are also hearing that perhaps Secretary of Defense Dick Cheney will also be here at the White House. The president is known as an early riser. He'll probably wake up around 5:30 on a normal day. Whether he'll be up before then is something we don't know yet. But the president will be probably back in his office at work before many Americans are even awake. Harry?
Linda Tyra at the White House, thank you very much. We want to take a look at some pool tape right now that is coming in from the Pentagon. We've got some tape of some of the aircraft that and pilots that are returning this morning from their sorties into Iraq. And as indicated all night long, as best we know, that the missions that have been flown thus far have been very successful. We should reiterate at this hour that we have no report from the Pentagon of U.S. casualties. And that was some tape that just came in from the Pentagon this morning of it looks like aircraft maybe taking off again.
And for more world reaction right now, we go to Moscow, where Anthony Mason is standing by. Good morning, Anthony.
Good morning, Paula. Early this morning, as soon as the attack began, the Soviet Union placed all of its forces in the south on high military alert. It's 11 o'clock here in Moscow now, so they are up and very aware of what's going on. President Gorbachev is expected to address the nation at any moment here now. The Soviets, as you know, have not committed any forces to the Gulf, but they've been very supportive of the United States all along, in spite of long-standing relations with Iraq. They've been very critical in these last days of Iraq's position, and a foreign ministry statement released this morning blamed the outbreak of the war on Saddam Hussein. Early TASS reports, that's early reports from the government news agency, are describing the attack in very positive terms, a pinpoint attack, a successful mission. So initial Soviet reports are very positive on the U.S. role in this. Paula, Harry?
Anthony, thank you. I'm going to go across the desk over here to Charlie Osgood this morning. Good morning, Charles.
Good morning, Harry and Paula. I guess there's certain news events that happen that all of us will remember as long as we live. Anyone old enough will certainly remember what he was doing and where he was when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor on the 7th of December 1941, or when President John F. Kennedy was shot and killed in Dallas, November 22nd, 1963. And maybe that is the way that we will remember the start of the Persian Gulf War, January 16th, 1991. Of course, how it struck us depends on who and where we were. There are a few cities in this country that have a higher stake than most in Operation Desert Storm. I'm talking about the Army, Navy, and Air Force towns that house big military bases. Our colleague Richard Schlesinger was in such a place last night, the Navy town of Norfolk, Virginia.
News of war broke just before the hockey game in Norfolk, Virginia.
Would you please stand as we reflect for a moment on the current world situation?
This Navy town was braced for war, but being prepared for war is not the same as being ready for it.
And I just pray to God that our loss of lives is not that bad, because I feel for everyone out there that has family over there.
It's sort of scary. In my lifetime, I didn't think we'd see war, and here it is, at 28 years old.
This naval station in Norfolk used to be the center of attention and activity in this city, but that was before the world changed. Since the August invasion of Kuwait, about 31,000 servicemen and women have been deployed from here for what is now Operation Desert Storm. 40 ships, most of the major ships in the Atlantic Fleet, which is headquartered here, are now over there. Gene 80 is on one of them, the battleship Wisconsin. He's Cindy 80's husband.
I really didn't think anything was going to happen, and then if it did, it wasn't going to be with my husband's ship. It would be somebody else, and then the first thing I hear is he's one of the ones out there.
Cindy 80 has spent many of the past nights in church, praying for peace. For a while, she was optimistic.
You know, I feel like I've got a lump right here, but I just can't cry anymore. I mean, it's just, I've been crying for days.
Cindy 80 spent most of the first hours of war in front of the television, watching closely for news of the war in general, the Wisconsin in particular. She keeps a church candle burning in the corner of her kitchen.
And as long as it's burning, I guess everything's going to be okay.
And that is all she can do. Richard Schlesinger, CBS News, Norfolk, Virginia.
Across the country, there is encouragement and some satisfaction over the fact that there are no reports as yet of any U.S. casualties, but that is very different from saying that there are reports of no casualties. All right, Paul?
Charlie, thank you.
I'm going to bring you up to date on the headlines now this morning. The U.S.-led war in the Persian Gulf is now some 8 hours old. Here are those headlines in Operation Desert Storm. A second daytime wave of bombing is now underway on targets in both Kuwait and Iraq. So far, no U.S. casualties reported in the massive airstrike. Saddam Hussein remains defiant and has reportedly been spotted in Baghdad at the television center there. President Bush assures the people, quote, the American people that is, we will not fail. The United States orchestrated airstrike has apparently met little resistance from the Iraqi forces, and Saddam Hussein has not made good on his threat to attack Israel. There are reports that perhaps the entire Iraqi Air Force and many of Iraq's anti-aircraft missile batteries have been destroyed. F-4 Wildcat Weasels from the 35th Tactical Air Wing, along with F-15s and British Tornadoes, were among the first jets in on the attack. Their pilots calling the moonless night perfect for the job. In Tunis, the PLO has denounced what it calls a, quote, cowardly aggression and is calling for a worldwide response. And those are the headlines at this point in the morning.
To this hour, anyway. We want to go back to about 9 o'clock last night when the president addressed the United States. This is a portion of that address that was delivered from the Oval Office.
Our objectives are clear. Saddam Hussein's forces will leave Kuwait. The legitimate government of Kuwait will be restored to its rightful place, and Kuwait will once again be free. Iraq will eventually comply with all relevant United Nations resolutions, and then, when peace is restored, it is our hope that Iraq will live as a peaceful and cooperative member of the family of nations, thus enhancing the security and stability of the Gulf. Some may ask, why act now? Why not wait? The answer is clear. The world could wait no longer. Sanctions, though having some effect, showed no signs of accomplishing their objective. Sanctions were tried for well over 5 months, and we and our allies concluded that sanctions alone would not force Saddam from Kuwait. While the world waited, Saddam Hussein systematically raped, pillaged, and plundered a tiny nation. No threat to his own. He subjected the people of Kuwait to unspeakable atrocities.
And President Bush, a part of his message that he delivered to the American people about 9 o'clock Eastern time last night.
It struck me in Leslie Stahl's reporting that she mentioned last night that the rough draft of that speech had been done for almost 3 weeks. And of course, the speechwriter's working tirelessly around the clock the last 3 days to put the finishing touches on it. We're going to go back to Moscow right now and chat with Anthony Mason again. Anthony, I'm curious if you've had a chance to talk with any folks in the street to get a sense of their reaction to what's transpired overnight. Good morning again.
Good morning. I think the Soviets were prepared for this. Certainly the Soviet government was prepared for this. They said the other day in a foreign ministry briefing yesterday, the foreign ministry spokesman was asked if the Soviets were expected to be consulted before an attack occurred, and they said, well, as far as we're concerned, as soon as the 15th arrived, in effect, the United States had the right to attack, as we understand it, and that attack had every right to proceed. We're expecting to be consulted, he said, but you know, the UN sanctions should go into effect. So I think the Soviets are ready. It will be interesting to see through the course of the day just what Soviets think. There was an interesting episode that occurred here within the last couple of days. Some people were picketing outside the Iraqi embassy here in Moscow, which, by the way, has not been evacuated. No Iraqis have been ordered to leave. It's still at full staff. And at one point, a number of Iraqis came out of the embassy and actually started attacking the Soviet pickets with sticks. So that turned into a bit of an embarrassing incident for everybody concerned. But there is tension even here between the Iraqis and the government over what's going on. The Soviets still have 130 people in Iraq. They evacuated a lot of their personnel, but they had advisors there, business advisors, military advisors. Most of the families came out. But there's going to be concern here about what's happening in Baghdad because there are still 130 Soviets inside Iraq. Harry, Paula?
And I'm curious, as this story continues to unfold, how much talk there continues to be there right now about what's going on in Lithuania and Latvia? Or has this completely taken that off the front pages there?
Well, we haven't really had a chance to, I mean, the newspapers, I don't think, will be reflecting what happened overnight. It happened, the attack began roughly about between 2 and 2:30 in the morning, Moscow time. I don't think the morning papers will really be reflecting much of the details overnight. Lithuania is, of course, what's being talked about here, but it will be very interesting to see in the next day or so how quickly, if indeed, the Lithuanian situation disappears. That is, of course, what the Lithuanians have been concerned about all along. This would be prime time for the Soviets to act in Lithuania if they wanted to.
Anthony Mason reporting from London for us this morning.
There is a news story out of Iran this morning, actually monitored out of Nicosia, Cyprus. The radio there is being monitored. Iran radio said it would not take sides in the conflict that is going on right now. And they have said that they would not allow any of the parties involved to use its territory. I guess that is a warning to both sides not to use their airspace. The armed forces of the Islamic Republic of Iran will not allow any of the warring sides to use its airspace, sea or land. The report said out of Iran radio the armed forces would refrain from taking sides and was respecting other countries' sovereignty, mutual rights, and international borders, it said. So that's some news being monitored out of Cyprus this morning of Iran radio.
We also have some news from NATO this morning, with the NATO allies pledging to defend Turkey, the only alliance member bordering Iraq, as war, of course, has erupted in the Persian Gulf. The alliance's 16 ambassadors made that pledge at an emergency meeting at NATO headquarters. The meeting was chaired by NATO Secretary General Manfred Warner, after hearing briefings from both the United States and Great Britain.
I was stunned, if I can take a second for some personal reflection. Last night as I was watching the news to see this all happen, and certainly this is something we have talked about on a daily basis since August. The sense of disbelief that we had visitors in our home last night. People were not journalists, people are not in the news business and don't follow this on a day-by-day basis. And there was a real sense of shock from them, and I think there's a real sense of shock among the American people, and as best we can, we're going to continue through the early morning hours here to deliver whatever current and verifiable information we can here. The other thing I was stunned by is, as I went to try and take a short nap before I came in this morning, I heard a spontaneous and what seemed to be a pretty large and sizable demonstration erupt on Broadway, marching down the street toward downtown Manhattan.
And our coverage will continue right after this. We're back here at just about, 24 minutes after the hour. We're going to go to London now for the latest on how the financial markets are reacting to the news of what transpired overnight. Let's go to Barry Peterson right now. Good morning, Barry. Actually, it's Richard Threlkeld.
Better yet, Paula, let's go to Richard Threlkeld. Barry's gone home to go to sleep, and he deserves it. It's not quite time yet. As you can see from behind me, the sun's just coming up. The stock exchange here in London has not yet opened, but we can gauge some indication, perhaps, of the market's reaction from Tokyo, where the trading day has ended. On their Thursday, they recorded the largest, 10th largest single stock advance in history, 1,000 points on the Tokyo index. It may very well be, and we'll have to see as the markets open here in New York later, that the markets may have discounted this, Paula, that they have expected hostilities to break out for so long that it's been quite predictable, coupled with the fact that the news from the front, so to speak, has been so good that the market, at least in Tokyo and perhaps here, has gone up.
With our change of command here, Barry Peterson leaving for the night, I'm wondering if you can tell me what sort of reaction you've heard to the news overnight.
Well, you've heard John Major, the British Prime Minister, say that Britain is foursquare behind this effort. The EEC, the European Economic Community, meets later today, as does NATO. What you sense overnight, and I think you'll sense today, is this gigantic coalition that President Bush has built coming together, and despite whatever differences they have, the French, the Germans, and so forth, lining up behind their troops and lining up behind this effort. How long that will continue remains to be seen, and it'll depend, of course, on how well the war goes.
Richard Threlkeld, you want to jump in now? Or?
Yeah, we want to check in right now in Saudi Arabia with newsman Jesse Schulman and find out, Jesse, what you're hearing, what you're seeing, and what news you can provide us this morning. Good morning.
Good morning. As the day broke and as the morning has worn on, with no Iraqi missiles, the great fear materializing, there's been a growing sense here of relief among people that I have seen and talked to, Saudi soldiers, People are smiling. People are saying, you say good morning, and they say it's a very good morning. There is an enormous sense that the great fear, the one great fear that Iraqi missiles would rain from the sky onto this large city, a city of over 1 million, the Saudi capital city, has not materialized, and that so far all signs are good. This is a lightening of a burden, and you can see it in people's faces and hear it in people's voices.
Jesse, you were in Riyadh then last night as the attack started?
That's right. The first we knew was that something was up. We obviously didn't know exactly what was. A great noise of aircraft taking off, an unusual number of aircraft, and then later on, just about at the same time as Marlon Fitzwater announced in Washington that the attack had begun, air raid sirens went off. People went into air raid shelters, but to many people's surprise, in about 25 minutes, the all clear sounded. And although everybody I know and everybody I saw kept a gas mask close at hand, there was nothing more. And as there continued to be nothing more, the faces have been getting cheerfuler and cheerfuler.
In retrospect, as you look back at that time last night, describe what went through your mind, and describe, if you will, the mood in Riyadh.
I won't pretend. I was very scared. It was a very unsettling moment when we heard those sirens go off. Riyadh is a long way from the front line, but still within range. Nobody knows, nobody knew, nobody still knows what kind of chemical weapons, what kind of other weapons Iraq might have been throwing at us. That was an enormously disturbing moment. But people filed into air raid shelters in a more or less orderly fashion. Many people sat inside shelters with gas masks on, very uncertain about what they should do. But very quickly it became clear that, in fact, we were quite safe, and then the all clear came, and the growing sense, for me personally, never mind for the population here, an enormous sense of relief that something rather dreadful seemed to have been prevented.
So, as you say, there's a lightening of the mood there now in Riyadh. We're coming up on, I guess, just about noon your time. As best you can see, as you have moved around there today, is it somewhat close to business as usual?
Somewhat close to business as usual. Beginning quite early in the morning, the traffic began to perk up much as it would on an ordinary day. There has been little sense this morning that there was ever a threat. It's not business as usual entirely. Certainly not the feeling of a normal day, but in terms of the patterns of daily life, yes, it's amazingly near an ordinary day here.
Describe to me, if you can, what kind of information you're getting there. What kind of public information is available in terms of local radio and television, or even in the newspapers?
Not a great deal. The local television station has mainly been playing some news, some Western news, and a lot of repeats of propaganda films, really, shots of glorious-looking Saudi forces in action, or not in action, in exercise action. The newspapers are obviously rather badly behind the story, and broadcasting is very carefully controlled here. As far as information from the American and other allied forces here, that has also been very, very skimpy. This is where the headquarters of Desert Shield, now Desert Storm, is, and the people we have here who are press officers and so forth, who are in theory here to tell us things, have told us virtually nothing.
All right,
they
Shulman.
have left it to Washington, or simply left it to our own devices to find out any kind of information about what's gone.
That's newsman Jesse Shulman reporting from Riyadh this morning.
And we're going to bring you up to date once again on the latest headlines in our continuous coverage this morning. Iraq's main air defenses may have been crippled. We will have more on that when we come back. Harry Smith and I now bring you up to date on the latest headlines in our continuous coverage here at CBS. Iraq's main air defenses may have been crippled. The United States says Saddam Hussein must quit Kuwait now to avoid further destruction. There is still no word of casualties on either side. and anti-war protests continue across the United States. A source in Egypt says that the first 2 waves of air attacks on Iraq may have been broken the back of that country's air resistance. In the first sorties, American F-15s and F-4s were joined by British, Saudi Arabian, and Kuwaiti jets, dropping an estimated 18,000 tons of explosives on Iraqi targets. It's full daylight in Iraq right now, and a second round of air attacks is underway. Returning American pilots described the scene as their bombs and missiles hit Baghdad.
Well, the biggest thing I saw was one of the most fantastic fireworks demonstrations I've seen since 4th of July party years and years and years ago. This was tremendous. Baghdad was lit up like a Christmas tree.
As we said earlier on, U.S. officials have so far said nothing about any casualties for the United States forces, but the British say all of their planes and pilots returned safely, at least after the first wave of air attacks. Meanwhile, at the United Nations, U.S. Ambassador Thomas Pickering said there is still a way out for Saddam Hussein. He said an Iraqi withdrawal from Kuwait will save Iraq from greater destruction. Iraqi military statements say residential areas of Baghdad have been bombed, but that has not been confirmed, and the Iraqis are saying nothing about any casualties there. And in this country, the voices of protest remain raised. One large demonstration was held in San Francisco, with other big turnouts in Washington and at United Nations headquarters in New York overnight.
That's the headlines up to now. We want to go back to Saudi Arabia right now, to Bob Simon, who is standing by with, I hope, some more news this morning. Good morning, Bob.
Good morning, Harry. There's been ample reporting all night about the various air forces that have been involved in these attacks, the Americans, the British, the Saudis, the Kuwaitis. One point which has not been made very much, because the restrictions on the reporting this have been very severe, is that these planes are not only attacking from Saudi Arabia, but from other countries in the Gulf. We still cannot name those countries, but the 35th Tactical Air Wing was flying out of a nearby country, and it's from that wing that you just heard the commander of the 35th saying that Baghdad was lit up like a Christmas tree. Here in Dhahran, the latest development is that the air base here, which also doubles as a domestic and international airport, has had a new restriction placed on it. We've heard that from now on there are only fighter planes flying out of this air base and airport. It's not only a question of restricting commercial flights, but there'll be no other kinds of military transport from Dhahran from now on until further notice, fighters only. Harry?
Bob, describe for me, if you will, what kinds of cooperation you are getting from the Department of Defense as you try and get more information out of them, and just tell me what's going on in that regard.
Harry, information so far has been minimal. This does not come as a surprise. In fact, we are a little bit pleasantly surprised that our satellite transmissions were not cut off. For many, many weeks, we were afraid that as soon as the war began, and we always expected it to happen at night, that our satellite transmissions would be cut and we wouldn't be able to report anything. The amount of information supplied so far has been absolutely minimal. In fact, the only report we've had of anything that has gone wrong has been not from official channels, but from our one CBS newsman who is not operating within the Pentagon pool framework, who happened to be up in the northern border town of Khafji and witnessed an Iraqi artillery strike on an oil facility there, which just suggests that since this was the only CBS newsman who is acting independently, we have no way of reporting now whether or not any other installations were hit, whether or not Iraqi artillery or rockets or missiles, for that matter, have landed anywhere else in Saudi Arabia, or for that matter, anywhere else in the Gulf.
Have you gotten any indication from the Defense Department people there when there might be any word of damage or casualty to either U.S. forces or to any of the equipment? We've already heard John Major standing in front of number 10 Downing Street saying, at least from his first indications from the first run of the Brits, that they sustained no casualties. We're still waiting to hear some sort of, at least a timetable or some kind of an hour at which we can get that kind of information from our own government. Have they given you an hour of the day when they might be able to give some of that information out?
Harry, you're waiting, I'm waiting, we're all waiting. The system is that even though we are in the largest American concentration of air power in Dhahran on the East Coast, that the command General Schwarzkopf's office is centered in Riyadh, and they will hold press briefings there.
All right, Bob, hang on. Bob, hang on one second. We've got some pool tape of American pilots just back and some of their reactions to what they saw and experienced.
Like I said, all the chances we could, we gave them chances right up even until after the 15th. We told them, we'll give you every chance you can. If you want to pull out, please. He wouldn't do it, so we had to do what we had to do.
If you could make a wish right now about what may or may not happen in the next few days, what would it be?
Well, I wish that Iraq would, Mr. Hussein would realize that he doesn't have a chance here, and that he would just say, hey, we'll call quits. I'll leave. You guys can, take off.
Sergeant, do you know what kind of punch these planes can deliver? What can they do?
These aircraft that we have, the F-15s, are air-to-air. The E models, which are here, they're more the air-to-ground. We would just fly a defensive role. We would go up with bombers and stuff like that and escort the bombers in, and take out any air targets that were trying to get our bombers.
So you had strike aircraft here as well, the F-15Es?
No, just the C models.
Okay.
That's a little unedited tape this morning from the Defense Department, and some of the frustration of this is that as it comes in, we're flying a little bit blind. We don't have a lot of information about who these people are and how they were involved and in what area of the operation. We've got some more tape we want to look at that's coming in just now.
Fighter Squadron Commander. Colonel, your name, can you spell your name for us, please? Kline.